So I told you that I'm the chair of the UUFC Social Action Committee. Had a great group of people, many of whom are here today, who are involved with the Social Action Committee. One thing that we were asked to do was to respond to a request from the Unitarian Universalist Association to become involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. When was that? 3 years ago, I think, the UUA directive came out. So we're kind of, well, I was going to say slow, but we work our own pace. And so we decided to make that a conversation front and center for our fellowship. During the springtime, we had many conversations about whether we want to put out a Black Lives Matter banner in front of our fellowship. In the social room, where Sarah's Good Hospitality is going to be served, we had a paper, a pendulum, right down here if you are opposed, right over here if you are in favor. The vast majority of our members spoke strongly in favor of hanging a Black Lives Matter banner here. There were a few folks who spoke against it, who wrote against it, and I understand spoke to some people against it. I've never heard those comments directly to me. But the comments that I heard where they were spoken against hanging a Black Lives Matter banner had some very good points of concern. You see, we don't have our banner hung yet. We are working on those concerns. And so what I want to start today with was to give you just a very brief history of the Black Lives Matter movement, and then talk to you about the UUA's place with the overall organization's strong support of this movement. And then we'll have some time for conversation to find out how you felt if you've been driving around. We have avid travelers here, and perhaps in your travels, you have seen churches along the way that have hung Black Lives Matter banners. How did that affect you? What kind of response did you have? So that's kind of where we're going to be going this morning, along with some magnificent music that we will sing and that we will experience. So thank you for this wonderful music. I've enjoyed commiserating with you on this. So the Black Lives Matter, you've heard of it, I'm sure. The movement began with a commitment to ending police brutality and state-sanctioned violence and injustice against people who are Black. It is also dedicated to affirming Black people's, quote, contributions to this society, our humanity, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression, according to its founders. Did you know the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement were three Black women, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. And they started this following the 2013 acquittal of George Zimmerman, remember his name? Who had shot and killed Trayvon Martin, an unarmed Black teenager the previous year, 2012. There are resources that can be found to explain systems such as mass incarceration, police brutality, and economic and educational inequality. These resources all point to a larger system that is not necessarily broken, but functions the way it was designed to oppress the very people who were originally brought to the United States as chattel. This context is necessary to understand why today the movement is called Black Lives Matter. Because historically, Black lives have not mattered. Let's think about a quote from Bryan Stevenson. I see his book is precariously placed on that easel, but you're going to hear a lot of words from, that's his book, Just Mercy, which was a UUA-sponsored read about 3 years ago. So Bryan Stevenson says, the greatest evil of American slavery was not involuntary servitude, but rather the narrative of racial differences we created to legitimate slavery. Because we never dealt with that evil, I don't think slavery ended in 1865. It just evolved. So, what can churches learn when making a Black Lives Matter proclamation? I, unfortunately, wasn't here about 3 weeks ago when Jonathan Zur spoke to this congregation. Were you there? A lot of you were there. Excellent. I got to watch his video last night on YouTube. And for those of you who were not there, you'll see in the weekly connection. Thank you. How'd you know that word slipped my mind? In the weekly connection that comes out to us, there will be a link. But it's very interesting that it's password protected. So if you want to watch Jonathan's talk from this pulpit 3 weeks ago, you'll follow the directions in the connection. And so he and I are partners in this passion about this. What can churches learn when making Black Lives Matter? What can they learn when they proclaim that Black Lives Matter? According to a 2015 article from Joshua Eaton in the magazine that comes to all of us as members, the UU World, pushback has indeed happened, whether in the form of minor complaints, online trolling protests, or even vandalism. This has been difficult for primarily white congregations. Clergy at several of these affected churches say that the backlash has only strengthened their church's commitment to focus on Black communities that face racism and violence on a daily basis. Vandalism has been common enough that the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, has created a resource page for guidance. We're not alone. The Episcopal, Presbyterian, Baptist, Lutheran, and the United Church of Christ churches have also seen their Black Lives Matter banners defaced. Violence, we celebrate, is exceedingly rare in primarily white liberal churches. Many of us living here in such a conservative area see our fellowship as a safe place where we can express progressive views without fear of reprisal, right? Don't you feel that? So it is important to acknowledge that once that Black Lives Matter sign is put up, the conservative community in which we live is brought to our door. Be ready. What is this backlash about? Reverend Broderick Greer from the Grace St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Memphis writes that this anger has to do with the history of white supremacy in the United States. Again, from Brian Stevenson, he supports this with his statement. Brian Stevenson said, "Whenever society begins to create policies and laws rooted in fear and anger, there will be abuse and injustice." One way to counter the notion of this movement being called All Lives Matter, which is what was suggested by a few of us, is to point out that all lives cannot matter if Black lives do not, and to provide education about the conditions that ignited the resistance. The Black Lives Matter movement is rooted in deeply humanistic belief that all lives are connected, all oppression, including that of LGBT persons, refugees, immigrants, Muslims, women, people living in poverty, and people living with disabilities, negatively affects all our lives. The mission of the Black Lives Matter movement is intersectional and invested in liberation for all. The Reverend John Creswell Jr., who is a minister at the UU Church of Annapolis, wrote, "Because of the structure and history of our country, there's a lot of guilt and shame around slavery, our original sin as a nation. What has grown out of that, with Black incarceration and drug laws, is tremendous shame in white communities within Unitarian Universalism and beyond. He says we can't articulate shame, and so it comes out as anger and pushback when Black Lives Matter or other multicultural projects are promoted that are targeted specifically for African Americans. That from the UU minister in Annapolis. Even primarily white progressive churches with the best of intentions can risk making the story about ourselves rather than about Black communities that are really experiencing oppression, especially when they experience vandalism or some kind of other backlash. Reverend Crestwell, the UU minister from Annapolis, emphasizes the importance of anti-oppression and anti-racism work, intercultural competency, emotional literacy to help UUs recognize our own privilege. Reverend Crestwell wrote, "This internal work can help primarily white congregations build the capacity to confront feeling of shame or guilt and accept their complicity in systemic racism. When we begin to claim and see that we are part of the problem within structures and institutions, that our biases and prejudices are a big part of the problem, hallelujah, then we will really begin the work of creating the beloved community." Let's reflect on that as we sing this next hymn, hymn number 170. We are a gentle, angry people. Stand as you are willing and able. moving over this way because of this Andy. But I also want to talk a little bit about this poster. It's a part of understanding the problem. Brian Stevenson's words again. He said, "We can't go on. We cannot pretend that something really destructive, something really corruptive happened when communities came to celebrate this kind of violence. We have to talk about it. We have to acknowledge the wrongfulness of it." Brian Stevenson, the author of Just Mercy, he's a criminal defense attorney, and he used that determination through his work as founder and director of the Equal Justice Initiative to develop and create the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a part of which you see right here, aka the Lynching Museum. And he created, the Equal Justice Initiative created the accompanying Legacy Museum, which both opened in Montgomery, Alabama in April 2018. I'm real sorry my friend Joe is not here today, Joe and Janet. I went to that museum and the memorial in June, just a month or so ago. And when I was reviewing, walking through the Legacy Museum, there are laws plastered all over the place. One law that I saw was from Alabama, 1952, and it was illegal for persons to play dominoes with people of color. What's my favorite game? Dominoes. What did I buy in the UUFC auction? To get dominoes lessons from Joe, who is a person of color. I told him about that when we sat down to play dominoes. You can guess what he did. He is so happy. He just laughed. And I love Joe's laugh. But it used to be illegal to do that, to play dominoes with Joe. Things you can learn in that museum. Brian Stevenson said that spaces have not been created in the United States to tell the history of racial inequality, to tell the history of slavery, of lynching, of segregation, that will motivate people to say, never again. My cousin Patty went to South Africa. In South Africa, she saw monuments about apartheid, monuments for Nelson Mandela. Rwanda recognizes lessons from its story of genocide. Berlin recognizes its lessons from the Holocaust. Brian Stevenson has been making the argument that a clear and direct line can be drawn from slavery to lynching to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. The memorial and the museum present narration, interactive videos, architecture to present our horrifying history and to help us come to terms with racial terror lynching. Our country's history of racial inequality burdens us and prevents us from having a healthy country. The creation of the museum and the monument in Montgomery, Alabama, is to create a country where 100 years from now, Black and brown people are not presumed dangerous and guilty. History is acknowledged and we recover from it. Let these lessons inspire us and our country and our fellowship to claim our difficult history and to commit to a just and peaceful future. Brian Stevenson said, "You don't change the world with ideas in your head, but with conviction in your heart." This is the most amazing memorial These are steel monuments that when you first walk in, you're walking in and you're looking at them, dare I say, dead on. And then as you slowly walk on, the sidewalk, well, it's not a sidewalk, the floor gets lower. And these then get higher. There is one monument for each county in the United States where lynching occurs. This is called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. My friend Michelle, who lives in Montgomery, says that is just too many words. And I think a lot of people disagree. I mean, agree that it's too, a lot of people agree that it's too many words. And so they call this the Lynching Museum. There's one here for Pickens County. I saw it. And on each memorial is carved the names of the people who are known who were lynched in the county and the year. I saw some monuments that have one name, some monuments that have many names. And there's an interesting component to this museum. So this is all permanent, and it's outdoors. The lighting that you see here is sunshine. It's all outdoors with the ceiling over it, but the walls are open. On the grassy area outside is its partner. I saw the one for Pickens County out in the grass. It's waiting for Pickens County to come and work with the EJI, the Equal Justice Initiative, and say, we are ready to bring this monument home to Pickens County. And then Pickens County would then work with the EJI Institute to make a place of reverence and respect. Interesting idea. How many monuments have you seen to lynching? It's a part of our history. So I experienced this, and then I went outside. It was a hot day, and there was a lovely young man sitting under a cover with ice cold water, and he was an EJI volunteer. I said, how many of these have been claimed? Remember, this just opened in April. So one. So really? From where? Minnesota. Minnesota. So just know that it's here. Know that it's here. I'm so glad I experienced this. It's powerful, you guys. It's just powerful to see all of this and to go into the Legacy Museum and to celebrate my friendship with my friend Joe, with whom I can play dominoes without any problem at all. I won. So that's my travel to Montgomery, Alabama. On the way, I went through Atlanta, and in Atlanta, I saw a Presbyterian church. Prominent Black Lives Matter banner. How did I feel? I felt great. I need to go inside and talk to these people. I need to go and see what that church is like. I texted Reverend Bailoff, and I said, do you know this church? Because Terry is from Atlanta. She said, that church is known for its social justice. Oh. Have you had an experience? Robin is willing, now that she's taking a drink, Robin is willing to walk around and hear your thoughts as you have experienced a Black Lives Matter banner, if you have. Has anybody seen one in your travels? Holly?
I took my middle granddaughter to, my second granddaughter to Boston to visit her New England roots. And we would drive around on a hop-on, bus, and she would say, look, there's a Black Lives Matter banner. I said, it must be a Unitarian church, which is not uncommon in Boston, but some of them are congregational churches. So yes, we saw lots and lots of them. I also wanted to say that there is a gravestone, I think, I'm not sure the details. Abel Baptist Church has either a memorial or a gravestone to the last man lynched in Pickens County. I'll try to get some more details on it and pass on that information.
I wonder if that should be clarified to say the last man that we know of
Well, yeah.
that was lynched. Because as this museum points out, we don't know them all.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a city thing or not, but I was in Beverly, Massachusetts visiting my son and his family, and the Methodist Church, First Baptist Church, and the UU Church are all in the same block. They all had Black Lives Matter banners, and they all had rainbow flags. And the Baptist Church said, "Welcome immigrants and refugees." It was just, I felt like I was with my people.
Thank you.
I was recently in Minneapolis and
Minnesota.
and I took a walk one day down Promenade Street, Lake Street, where my family lives, and there was a Black Lives Matter banner in front of a home.
In front of the home.
In front of a home, which I thought was interesting and maybe something for us to think about.
Anybody else want to share? Well, keep watching. I haven't seen any locally. Thank you, Robin. There's an interesting YouTube, don't know the architect's name, I'm so sorry, but it's a great story about the architect who designed this memorial for peace and justice. Just call him Fred. Fred saw that Brian Stevenson was about to create this. He read about it. And so he sent an email cold. "Dear Equal Justice Initiative, I saw that you are planning a memorial for peace and justice. Do you have an architect? I am interested." And this is a really famous architect, so some of you that know architects will probably say, "You can't remember his name?" But that's true, I can't. But the architect from this created a hospital in Rwanda that was nurturing and healthy, because the hospital that he had studied there made people sicker than when they went in. He went in another country and created a school that inspired learning in another country. But it's a great story about the developing partnership with this man and Brian Stevenson. And when they met in Montgomery, Alabama, Brian took the architect for a walk around Montgomery. And can you guess what the primary monuments in Montgomery, Alabama were recognizing? Confederacy. Yeah. And in this talk, maybe it was a TED Talk, in this talk the architect had a plot of Montgomery with points where all of the Confederate monuments are. And there was one by the slave market in downtown Montgomery to acknowledge where that was.
I'm pretty sure that there's a 60 Minutes on this.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to.
And Oprah Winfrey, and NPR. I was listening to, Andy was saying there's a 60 Minutes on this. And I learned about it listening to NPR. And Montgomery is where I'm from. It's where my high school girlfriends live. And I emailed them and said, "I heard about this." And they were, of course, very excited. So when I went in June, I went with my high school girlfriends to go see this. But when you just Google this, you'll get 60 Minutes, you'll get the TED Talk, you'll get the YouTube. It's an idea that thankfully is catching on. Did somebody else want to say something before we sing? All right. Thank you, everybody.